Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Who's on the line?
Well, I am extremely excited to talk to this man. As a longtime follower of your network and a big-time college football fan, this is Dave Greenfield. Finally get an opportunity to talk to Mark Rogers.
David, how you doing tonight?
I am doing excellent. I'm doing a lot better, Mark, now that we have Big Ten football. I'm doing even better.
For sure.
I'm just extremely excited about it. I think that Desert has an opportunity to be a very, very good Ohio State. I mean, I actually think this has a chance to be one of the best Ohio State football teams I've ever seen, to be honest with you. And it would have just been a robbery if they wouldn't have gotten a chance to play this year. And I firmly feel that way. And I'm just so glad that the coaches and that the players got a chance to fight for this, which made me really happy, And I appreciate what Coach Dave did, and I appreciate what the players did. I just wanted to see what your thoughts are on this Ohio State team and maybe how they went to do you think this can be one of the better Ohio State teams you've seen?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that Justin Fields is not necessarily the best Ohio State quarterback ever, but he has the highest ceiling of anyone I can think of as a runner and passer, and he certainly turned in a tremendous season last year. And I would think that college football fans, regardless of who they root for, would like to see him healthy all the way through. So he played extremely well down the stretch, but that was with the bum knee and the knee brace, and that hampered him and didn't immobilize him, but he wasn't the threat downfield that he would have been running the football against the likes of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Clemson. And so that would be great to see.
Well, the one thing I was going to say, and that's what if we would have pulled out the game against Clemson at the end, or if a number of different plays would have gone the other way, or we would have won that game, it would have concerned me had we had to play LSU and he would have been at 100%. Or, J.K. Dobbins also got hurt that second half against Clemson. He might not have been 100%. So, I mean, it's scary enough to play LSU last year with as good as they were, but I think if those guys were even close to 100%, I would have liked our chances in that game. I don't know if we could have beaten them, especially with as good a year as Joe Burrow had, but we would have had the best defense I believe they would have played. And I think with a healthy Dobbins and Fields, I think we could have had a really good chance. We'd have played them much better than Clemson. I'll just say that. I don't know what your feelings are on that, kind of looking back on that. But
well, I know most people know that I'm an Ohio State fan, so I tread lightly there because of the way I present the show and the channel, and the content is to be as neutral as possible. But even people that were not Ohio State fans, droves of people have commented to me, and I've seen it posted elsewhere, that in just watching the game, which I have a number of times, that I believe Ohio State was the better team. I believe that Clemson doesn't need to apologize for winning. I believe that they made plays in the fourth quarter that were exceptional, meaning the offensive drive from the whatever it was that went 96 yards, whatever the yardage total was, 95, 98 yards, was tremendous because they figured out a way to use Travis Etienne as a receiver when he wasn't making plays as a running back. And Trevor Lawrence was used as a runner, which was a bit of a surprise to everyone to that extent. And they made a great comeback, and they took advantage of opportunities. I do believe that every call that could have gone either way went against Ohio State.
That's true, yeah.
I'm not going to call them all bad calls, but they were all questionable calls, and they all just seemed to go against Ohio State. It would have been one thing if the targeting would have went Clemson's way, but the roughing the kicker would have been just a running into the kicker and went Ohio State's way. And then maybe the strip of the Jeff Okuda strip might have went Ohio State. There were four calls there, and if they would have split them, not that the refs consciously would split them, but they all went against Ohio State. I thought the Buckeyes were a better team, but they didn't win the game fair and square. I believe that they would have played LSU closer.
I think so, just for the simple fact that I thought we had the best secondary in the country last year. We have a secondary with 3 first-round draft picks. Now, I thought LSU had one of the 2 best groups of receivers in the country. So that would have been a primetime matchup. Because I think them and Alabama probably had the 2 best groups of receivers in the country, I would say, last year, if you look at it.
I would agree.
And, I think that, obviously we have the best defensive player in the country in Chase Young. So that would have been a primetime matchup. My only concern would have been with J.K. Dobbins and Justin Fields been fully healthy, because as great as our defense is, I still think we would have had to score at least north of 30 points to beat Joe Burrow in that offense. I mean, just bottom line. I mean, with the way the guy had the greatest season a college quarterback ever had statistically.
Yeah.
So you're probably, even with our defense, we're still probably going to need in the neighborhood of, 34, 35 points to pull that game out. Does that sound about right? I think that would have probably done it, but, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah, I would think that we were looking at a 42-38, 38-35, something in that range.
Yeah. I think that's probably about right. I mean, I really liked that team last year, though. I mean, I thought from a centric standpoint, it was balanced offensively. They could run it, they could throw it. I honestly thought last year's team, I don't know what you thought, Mark, but I thought that might have been better than the 14 team. At least because it was better at quarterback. Because I'll take Fields over Barrett and Cardell Jones. I mean, let's be fair. I mean, they're good college quarterbacks, but they're not as good as Justin Fields.
Oh, I couldn't agree more there. Dobbins versus Elliott. I'm trying to think the offensive lines. Yeah, you could make an argument that last year's team was just as good, if not better. It's difficult to really separate the other positional units. And Fields is a better quarterback and had a better season last year than Barrett. Had an exceptional 2014 season. Now, if we were going to judge JT Barrett, and this was November of 2014, I think Ohio State fans would have a much different judgment on him then than they did at the completion of his career. Despite all that he accomplished over the next 3 seasons, he showed us his limitations, more so than he did in 2014.
I would agree, although I'll say this, so you may disagree with me on this, Mark, but bottom line, I don't think they won the national championship with him as quarterback. I honestly think Cardell Jones I actually think in many ways it worked out that Cardell Jones was our quarterback for that 3-game run. I mean, and he had that cannon for an arm, and he had that symmetry with play wide receiver that was just amazing in that 3-game stretch. So, I don't know. Still wonder this day if we would have won the national championship with Barrett had he not gotten hurt. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know what your thoughts on that are, but.
Well, there's no question. All you have to do is watch, and not that this means anything, but it's just what comes to mind when talking about arm strength between the 2 quarterbacks is watch an Ohio State spring game at halftime of the spring game after Barrett and Cardell Jones left campus, and they'd have him throw from the end zone line. And obviously Cardell Jones had a cannon compared to Barrett. And Devin Smith was just lethal and made so many plays downfield that were huge that, I don't know, Barrett's a better runner, although Cardell showed himself against Alabama in particular to be a running threat and a more physical runner. He played 3 exceptional games, especially considering the circumstances.
I mean, I just, 2015, I think that quarterback controversy really hurt that team early in the season. But that team, I listened to your Buckeye College show, by the way. I think Tony Turner made a comment that team just seemed like out of sorts that year, and they just didn't seem, real focused. I've always felt that losing Tom Herman as their offensive coordinator was huge. Just for the simple fact that, I thought he did a great job of running that offense. And the one thing I'll say about the Meyer era is the only thing he missed on a few times was replacing some assistant coaches. I mean, because he always lost staff because a lot of his staff would go on and become head coaches. But I think that Ed Warner and back for that offense in 15 were just, I mean, they just weren't as good as running that offense as Tom Herman was, just bottom line. And I think that was part of the reason they had some of the struggles they did in 2015. You think it was coaching related or just lack of focus? Maybe what that team didn't repeat?
Well, my goodness, the team was so talented that I think that they were good enough to be lacking some focus. And of course, anytime that you say a team is lacking focus, I think that shortchanges particular players on the team because they're not all the same. It's kind of a general statement to make, meaning that there were focus issues from some. Obviously, not every athlete wasn't focused.
Right.
There are different disciplines and different.
It seemed like there was a lot of games that was sleepwalking that they
Oh my goodness,
like 3 or 4 touchdowns, and you know what I mean?
Because of where I live, I don't make a whole lot of games live, but I went to the Northern Illinois game live, and they needed a Darren Lee pick 6 to win that game, and it was only a 7-point win against Northern Illinois. And here they are, most likely the most talented team in the country, and at that point were ranked whatever they were, 1, 2, or 3, and they were 6, 7, and 0 at the time, and they are struggling against a MAC team at home.
Right.
It was awful. Yeah.
I mean, that was like they struggled against Indiana early in the year. Indiana had a chance to throw a pass and
sure. Yep.
And they looked out of sorts, and that sounds like by the end of the year they were playing as good as anybody. I mean, if they had been in the playoff, I mean, I would have liked our chances to match up against Clemson or Alabama that year in 2015 because I think we were as good or better. Now, they were great teams, don't get me wrong, but I think we definitely would have matched up. The team that went to the playoff at 16 will probably overachieved.
Yes.
Because it lost all good players to the NFL. It won like 2 or 3 close games at the end of the year. It wasn't very good offensively.
No.
They didn't have as good an offensive line. I mean, Mike Weber's good, but he's not Ezekiel Elliott good. And, they weren't as good at wide receiver. And, they still had Barrett. The talent around Barrett that they had the previous year. So, and you could see that they were struggling. I mean, when they lost to Clemson, I was not surprised. I was surprised they got shut out. I thought it would be at least a competitive game, but I just thought Clemson was the better team that year.
Well, David, to show that I try to cut it straight as much as possible, I will make this comment because for as much as I thought that the 2015 team was just immensely talented, of course, that can't be questioned, but we'll never know what would have happened. Obviously, the team that sleptwalked at home against Michigan State and lost on the last play of the game then saw that Michigan State team represent the Big Ten and get just bludgeoned by Alabama when we all wanted to see the rematch from 2014 and the 2 biggest brands and most talented teams in the country play in 2015. And you would think that would have been the kind of matchup and kind of challenge that would have woke that team up. But just to show that I cut it straight and do my very best to do so, yes, that 2016 team, as much as I believe that they outplayed Clemson in 2019, did I think that Michigan outplayed them in 2016 and really should have salted away that game and really were the better team for most of the game.
Well, that was the one game of the Harbaugh era. If people, the one thing with that team with Harbaugh, by the way, most of those recruits I think were Brady Hope's players.
Yes,
that he had going, to take that game. I think what hurt him is their quarterback was in bad shape. State couldn't complete a pass. I think his shoulder was done. And Ohio State's 2 touchdowns were basically because of their defense. Hooker had a pick 6, and then the other was basically returned to the 2-yard line. So, I mean, their 2 touchdowns in regulation were basically defensive touchdowns. So you could kind of see their offensive struggles, that year too. And that's the thing, I mean, that's if Harbaugh was ever going to get him, it was that year. If you'd asked me before the 2016 season, if we'd had this discussion in August of 2016, do you think Ohio State's a playoff team? I said no. I think they'll probably lose, maybe 2 or 3 games this year. So, I mean, I'm a realistic Ohio State fan. Like, there's a group of Ohio State teams I always have a feeling that can win a national title at the beginning of the year. Like, I go back I first started watching Ohio State football in about '86. Was my first year. Unfortunately, I had to bring up that year because a certain quarterback made a guarantee in Columbus, and I don't want to go there, but that's
yeah. That Michigan game was rough to take.
Matt France.
Yes, Matt France from 45 yards. Yep.
Yeah, it was, and then they go to the Rose Bowl and they lose to an Arizona State team that's coached by.
Sure, John Cooper.
John Cooper. Yeah, and which though, John Cooper gets the job probably because he wins that game. He comes to Ohio State and he can never beat that team. And you can tell it. But, yeah, I mean, there's just like a group of Ohio State teams that I always knew were special, like 96, 95, 98.
Yeah.
You know, 02, I never thought was going to be that good. That was like a dream season.
Sure.
You know, and, you know, that team came out of nowhere.
I thought the 05 team was really good. The 05 team was close to being extremely special.
Oh, you know what I've said to this day, Mark? I think the 05 team is 10 times more talented and better than the 06 or 07 teams. The thing about it, the 05 team is they just played two of the three best teams in college football. They played the best Texas team ever.
Sure.
And lost by 3 points.
And if Ryan Hamby catches the ball in the end zone, they're up, 9 or 10 in the fourth quarter.
Sure. I mean, you know, they blew so many red. That was kind of like the Clemson game. They blew so many red zone chances. You know, that was what caused them that game. I mean, they Hawk, D'Antonio Holmes, and Troy Smith. I mean, that team was loaded. I mean, it was much better than the 06 team. I think the 06 team, you know, Texas and Penn State weren't as good in 06 as they were in 05. I mean,
sure.
Bottom line. You know, that Penn State in 05 came what was a Chad Henry and Mario Manningham.
Yeah.
On a last-second touchdown.
1 second.
Pass.
Yep.
Or Joe Paterno might have had a 6th undefeated team that year.
Well, it would have been a historic and very controversial decision to figure out who was going to play in the national championship game because you would have had 3 power programs undefeated.
Sure. Yeah. I tell you what, that's only, you ever want to look at the last time that the SEC, if you had a playoff that year, Mark, the 4 playoff teams would have been Ohio State, Penn State, USC, and Texas. You'd have 2 Big Ten teams and no SEC teams. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine?
Yeah, that would have been crazy. Yeah, Georgia won the SEC that year.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people, I mean, you've had the SEC Big Ten debate for a long period of time. I would always say, and, you know, a lot of it's said that we've talked about population shift and how, you know, it's moved around. But, like, do you remember in the 90s and the early 2000s, I thought the balance of power was fairly close between the SEC and the Big Ten. I mean, wouldn't you say? Like, if we were to compare the...
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. I wrote papers on it. I have gotten on here and tried to wax poetic on the balance and the way it shifted. You know, that Ohio State loss against Florida in 06 really damaged the Big Ten from a perception standpoint. But people forget that going into that game, that if I remember the bowl games correctly, Penn State beat Tennessee in a bowl game in the Outback Bowl. And the other matchup... Was it
the Outback or the Citrus?
I thought it was the Outback Bowl because I thought the Citrus Bowl game was Wisconsin and Arkansas.
Okay, yeah, no, you're right.
Yeah, the Citrus Bowl
was Arkansas team. Good call.
And really, in looking and comparing those teams, even though I don't believe Ohio State and Wisconsin played in 06, because Wisconsin only lost 1 game. I think they lost to Michigan. That was a quirk in the schedule that year. Ohio State and Wisconsin didn't play, but Wisconsin beat Arkansas, and Arkansas was a team that took Florida to a 10-point game, and it was a 3-point game late in the game in the SEC championship game. So, of course, everybody focuses on the championship game, but the Big Ten played well against the SEC in the other 2 matchups that mattered in bowl participation that year. But, of course, the Big Ten took a huge hit getting drubbed. And then, of course, Ohio State came back. And as you mentioned, that 07 team was good, but all you had to do was watch the Illinois game to see that they weren't that good. And with Todd Beckman at quarterback, that was a difficult matchup against LSU, of course.
Yeah, he got exposed towards the end of the year. He looked terrible against Illinois. And, I mean, their offense was really run through Beanie Wells that year. I mean, he pretty much carried them that year. And, you know, obviously he got, I think, exposed in that title game against LSU. Now, they actually played a better game against LSU than they played against Florida. It was a semi-more competitive game. The Florida game to this day, and, you know, to be perfectly honest, I watched like 6 Florida games in 06, Mark. And I love Urban Meyer. I think Urban Meyer is one of the 5 to 10 greatest coaches of all time.
Yep.
But I will still say to this day, and I would say to Urban, I didn't think that Florida team was that good. I mean, I thought Chris was a mediocre. I didn't think he was a good college quarterback, but I never thought he was like a special college quarterback. I thought they had a good defense, but I thought we had played, you know, pretty good defenses earlier in the year in Texas and Michigan, and we did pretty well against them. And I mean, I don't know if the game would have been closer had Ted Ginn not gotten hurt. I mean, I think that was a major injury. I mean, that's like taking maybe Percy Parvin off of Florida, you know, because that's our big maker on offense. But, you know, I to this day, I would always like to ask Tressel about that game. I don't know if it was the layoff or whatever hurt that team, but that team just did not look right in that game. And, you know, give Urban and Florida credit. They were just ready and more prepared to play that day, you know.
Yeah, and the one thing that added to the Ginn loss, from what I understand in talking to Ohio State beat writers, is that the coaching staff put more emphasis on the game plan on Ginn than usual. That they really wanted to weigh heavily on Ginn, had a lot of special plays for him, and that really, really hurt the game plan when he got knocked out.
Yeah, I had heard that too. I mean, you could talk, and you always saw Gonzalez benefited from having Ginn over on the other side because he would receive a majority of coverage, and then, you know, that would open up things for Gonzalez too. But yeah, I mean, you know, that's one of those losses that I think that, because I didn't have too many losses in the Tressel era that really upset me. But that, I mean, obviously that one, the Texas loss, the one loss that always got me in the Tressel era was that home loss to USC in 09. They had no business losing that game at home to USC in 09. Remember that game?
Oh, of course. USC went, about 91, 92 yards in the closing minutes. Yeah.
Matt Barkley.
Yeah, after the Ohio State defense had shut them down the entire game. What was it, 15-10 going into that drive?
Yeah. Right. Well, I wanted revenge from the year before when we gone out there and gotten just
that was ugly. Well, that was a Beckman game when Terrell Pryor, of course, took over.
Right. Well, yeah, because if you ever break it down, Tressel really built his offense around 4 players when he was at Ohio State: Maurice Clarett, Troy Smith, Chris Beanie Wells, and Terrell Pryor. You know, those were pretty much the 4 guys he built his offense around. I always wonder what the 03 team would have been like had Maurice Clarett come back. Situation never happened. Because they had a lot of players coming back off of that national title team in 03. They could have been very good too.
Sure. And Lionel Ross was nothing exciting. He just wasn't that caliber of a back.
Yeah, neither was Maurice Hall. I mean,
Maurice Hall.
Both those guys. I mean, they weren't Maurice Clarett. And you know, like I said, I think Tressel kind of really built his offense around him, you know, at that particular time. But, yeah, I mean, that could have been a good team as well. I mean, like I said, I think there's these group of teams in Ohio State history from, like, the mid-'90s all the way to the present. And I feel really strong about this team. You know, I just wonder about the COVID situation. I mean, do you believe that they're going to let players sit out for 3 weeks if they get COVID? That just seems extreme.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't it?
Well, I think that based on how we arrived to this point, that we could have expected that the health and safety guidelines would be pretty strict, considering that the season was that close to being canceled. So I'm not that surprised.
Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, the bottom line is though, you know, obviously the one thing, if they'd have started this season earlier, I mean, they could have built in more bye weeks. They could have, kind of protected themselves if they had to reschedule or move around games, but we're at where we're at, unfortunately, and they've got to try and do 9 games in 9 weeks, and, who knows? Let's just hope everybody stays healthy. We can get through it, but it's going to be difficult, I think, don't you?
Yeah, and that's what I don't like about the conclusion to this is that we all celebrated when we heard the news about the Big Ten coming back, but as has been kind of the catchphrase, no wiggle room in trying to get this thing done. And if the Big Ten champion or any contending team for a playoff misses, let's say, 2 games, then it's going to be fascinating to see how that compares with already playing 1 or 2 less games than everybody else, how that's going to be viewed by the College Football Playoff Selection Committee.
That's true, yeah. I mean, I actually think, do you think there's a chance 2 Big Ten teams could make it this year? I mean, if you get maybe a really good one-loss Penn State team, maybe it's a close loss to Ohio State, and they win the rest of their games, you think there's a chance?
Well, we've got this dynamic of no non-conference games, which is, when I say none, obviously there's some, but there's none of significance, none. So unless some of these teams that have lost games in the Big 12 surprise us and become contenders, like Iowa State or Kansas State in particular, then we basically have no non-conference games to compare these conferences. So what we have are what teams are the most dominant in their conference, because we know that the College Football Playoff Selection Committee has a built-in bias of sorts, just like we all do. And most likely that bias says that the SEC is the best conference, the Big Ten is the second best conference, and then there's probably some debate between the ACC and the Big 12. So if there's a tiebreak, it's going to be fascinating if a Big 12 team, for example, wins the conference but has, let's say, 2 losses. So let's say Texas wins the Big 12, they're 8-2. And a Penn State or a Georgia or somebody of that ilk is able to make it to a conference championship game and lose, or in Penn State's case, loses to Ohio State. And then they're going to have an opportunity because of the scheduling setup to beat another really good team in this championship weekend that the Big Ten is putting on, where I could see a scenario in which, especially if there's a 3-loss champion, and people, I'm guessing, don't see the possibility of that happening, but we've got to realize that the ACC and the SEC are going from 8 conference games to 10, and some of these SEC schedules are pretty brutal.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like you said, I mean, they are the best conference, but I mean, I think the Big Ten is good this year. I don't know if the Big Ten, what would you put it at as like a level of play? Do you think it's as good as it was maybe last year or 2 years ago? Because I think Michigan's going to be a little bit down this year. They got a new quarterback. They're replacing offensive line. We don't know if Nico Collins is going to play. Wisconsin, they always find running backs, but Jonathan Taylor was really good. I mean, Minnesota, I heard Bateman, their best receiver, is going to come back and play. I think they could be pretty good. I mean, do you think the conference overall is as good as it's maybe been a few years ago, or I don't know, what do you think? Well,
see, what I'm looking at when you mentioned that is if you run everybody down, everybody's pretty much, if you're comparing 2020 and what we expected to be to, let's say, 2016-17, everybody's pretty much where they were then, excluding Minnesota. Minnesota's improved dramatically. Now we're taking one season. Maybe it was an aberration, or maybe this is what Minnesota is. But everybody else is pretty much the same program, although Michigan State, they were starting to tumble at that time, 16 and 17. Indiana's somewhat improved, but not in a significant manner that it matters on a national stage. So I got to think that the conference is pretty much the same. And if anything, Minnesota's maybe significantly better. Well, I would like to see them back up what they did last season.
Yeah, but it's one thing to have an 11-2 year. It's another thing to repeat it on a consistent basis. I get your point. I think Michigan is maybe like a top 20 team this year. I don't know if they're like a top 15 team. That's what I was going to say. Maybe they're down a little bit. And then I think that Wisconsin, I'm still not sure on Wisconsin. I mean, they did lose a couple key guys on defense, and then Taylor is just, I mean, they just keep up the run at running back, so maybe they will have another great one, like they've had a Gordon, and then they have a Taylor, and, another great running back. But, that other side's going to be interesting. I don't think Iowa's going to be that much of a factor this year. They lost their quarterback. I think they lost a couple other key guys, on the offensive line and defensive line. But, yeah, I think it's maybe Minnesota and Wisconsin on the other side. I think it's Ohio State and then Penn State, and I think probably Michigan is probably a place, I would say. Pretty solid third. Is that about right?
I would agree. I hope that the three best teams aren't in the same division, but they probably are this year.
Well, I mean, Wisconsin or Minnesota could be as good or better than Michigan. That first game is going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan goes to Minnesota.
Sure.
That will be an interesting game. I want to see, what their quarterback situation looks like. And, they got to replace a lot of offensive linemen. So we'll see. I mean, Harbaugh's yet to get the quarterback situation right there. That's the one thing I thought he would eventually be able to do, is I thought he would eventually be able to recruit a quarterback. And I thought the guy that had Andrew Luck at Stanford would eventually find his Andrew Luck, but he hasn't. And, until he ever does that, and he recruits at a pretty good level. I mean, he doesn't recruit at Ohio State's level. Nobody does in the Big Ten. But, if he recruited at his level and had, a really good quarterback, then, maybe we could have a conversation. But he just had really average to below average college quarterbacks. I mean,
absolutely.
That's pretty much a fair assessment of their quarterback situation.
Well, pretty much. These are the two guys that have been recruited directly into the Michigan program since Harbaugh's been there that the most has been expected of. Now, one has departed, and now we've got Joe Milton, who's supposed to be a pretty dynamic runner, but needs some development as a passer. But, yes, it's been a lot of the Brandon Peters, Jake Rudock style, Wilton Spate type of quarterback, which we're talking about quarterbacks that are top 40, 50 quarterbacks in the nation, and that shouldn't be the standard at Michigan. So to your point, he's not been able to find anyone or develop anyone, but Shea Patterson was supposed to be that guy, and he was good. He was an improvement, but not to the level that they need.
Yeah, I mean, because the bottom line is you just take a look at last year's playoff. I mean, the four teams that were in there were probably four of the best quarterbacks in the country. So football has never been more quarterback driven than it is right now. Obviously, pretty much at every level. So, until he ever gets that position right, that's why. I mean, Penn State's been the one program though that I think, and I think Penn State is the second best program in the Big Ten. Probably over the last few years. I mean, they're the last Big Ten team that wasn't Ohio State to win the Big Ten title. And they recruit the skill position players pretty well. They recruit defense pretty well. And they've had a really good college quarterback in McSorley, who I thought was really a very, very good college quarterback. And then, now we'll see about Sean Clifford. I saw some of his high school games, and he was a decent high school prospect, but I just don't know if he's at like that McSorley type level to where he worries me, to where he has the ability to win a game, throwing the football around. I have my doubts.
Well, what disappointed me about Clifford last year, if you saw Clifford play on a regular basis, what disappointed me there is that he played his worst games against the best teams. He did not really play an outstanding game or even a really good game against a quality opponent.
Right, that's true. That's true. I mean, he played okay against Michigan, I guess, at times.
Yeah, he did
year.
in that game. He didn't play well against Minnesota. He didn't play well against Ohio State. He only had to throw 19 or 20 passes against Memphis because Journey Brown ran for 1,000,000 yards.
Right.
Yeah, he didn't play well against the better defenses that he played.
Yeah, I mean, I tell you what, if Penn State gets Micah Parsons to come back, I think he was going to be the best linebacker in the country this year. If they get him back, that's a big deal. I mean, I still don't think they're good enough to beat Ohio State, but I think they're obviously that. I think he's the best linebacker in the country. You know, I think, is that a fair statement?
Yeah, he was a monster last year, and yeah, it's going to be a top NFL pick. Sure.
I mean, I still don't think that's enough for them to beat the Buckeyes, but obviously it totally improves their defense. And I mean, you know, you get back a great player, that's always going to help.
Yeah, I'm looking at Clifford right here. This is against the better defenses. Against Pitt, 14 for 30, 222. Mm-hmm. Then he tore up Maryland, had a great game, but they're bad. Excellent game against Purdue. Then, okay, takes him on another tough defense. Iowa, 12 for 24, 117. The Michigan game, as you mentioned, he had 3 touchdown passes against no picks, 14 of 25 for $182. Minnesota, 3 interceptions, 23 for 43. Indiana, 11 for 23 for 179. 10 for 17 against Ohio State. Of course, he got hurt in that game. And then again, against Memphis, he only had to throw for 133 yards, and they scored 50 points.
Right, yeah, you're right. That was all the running backs. They pretty much ran. They probably ran for like 200, 300 yards in that game on the ground.
Yeah, Journey Brown ran for 200 plus by himself in that game.
Yeah, well, and he's back this year, so that got him back at running back.
They ran for 396 in that game.
Yeah, was it, you said over 300 yards?
Almost 400. 396.
Oh, wow. Wow, I knew it was a lot. I didn't know it was quite 400, but yeah, they tore him up pretty good. I mean, I thought Penn State actually overachieved a little bit last year. I did not think that was an 11-2 football team going into last year. Isn't that what they finished, 11-2?
Yes.
Yeah, I did not think that was an 11-win team last year. And, you know, it goes to show you, I mean, you know, they won a couple games I didn't think they'd win, and, you know, we're a better football team. I think with it not being the white out there, too, I think that's always been a big factor, like it was in 05, even in 16 when we lost up there. It's, you know, it's a big factor. You know, although those were 2 really good Penn State teams, too. I mean, the 16 team won the Big Ten, and we talked about how good that 05 team was. But and obviously, Ohio State almost lost up there in 18. It took Dwayne Haskins' heroics late in the game. And a really bad play call by James Franklin at the end of that game to let the tail back.
Yeah, they had to go 5 yards, and they're running. It just, it was not a good play call. And, of course, the 14 game was tight.
Oh, yeah, that was the double overtime game, yeah. That was really their toughest game after the Virginia Tech loss that year, 14, really. You know, considering that game with double overtime, and they barely pulled that one out.
Yep.
But, yeah, I'm excited, Mark. I think this Ohio State team's going to be in for big things. I just, obviously, it's the year of COVID. Everybody understands that. I just hope that everybody stays healthy. I wish health on all of these players. And let's get through these 9 games. And, you know, if Ohio State just wins out, goes 9-0, then they'll leave no doubt. Then they're a playoff team. I mean, a 9-0 Ohio State team that wins the Big Ten is a playoff team, and just write it down. I mean, there would be no doubt at that point, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt there. There can't be a squabble over 9-0 versus 10-0 versus 11-0. It's Ohio State. They've gone through the Big Ten, arguably the best conference, most likely the second best conference. Yeah, they're just write it in. And we're going to see, obviously, losses from teams in other conferences, even the teams that win the championship.
Hey, last couple things before I let you go, Mark.
Sure.
Cincinnati, if they go undefeated, any chance?
Well, that would be a comparison between Cincinnati and a conference champion that, say, loses 2 games, 3 games. But in that conference, that's
Yeah,
the conference to do it in, because that conference is gaining a ton of respect because they played really well against the Power Five for a number of years now. So they're going to have to play Memphis probably twice. I'm not looking at their schedule right now, but between the championship game and the regular season, of course, they don't have a non-conference game to kind of prove themselves against the Power Five, but the Americans been, they will have beaten. They're 2-0 right now, having played basically no one. But no, I'm sorry, they're 1-0. They've got Army coming up this week, which their ranking doesn't mean anything at this point. But
right.
They've got SMU on the road. They've got Memphis at home. They've got Houston. They've got UCF, and they would hopefully play. They're hoping for one of those teams to be unscathed, other than the win that they notch against them, and then to play a one-loss team in the conference championship game.
Yeah, well, I mean, say if they get compared to a one-loss, let's say Big 12 champion, I think that they would still probably take a one-loss Oklahoma or a one-loss Texas.
Yeah, I'm looking at like a two-loss,
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's got to be two losses.
Yeah, you basically would have them be undefeated and then be compared to a two-loss conference champion, you're saying, right?
Yeah, then that's going to be a fascinating debate.
Yeah, it would have been interesting. I mean, if the Big Ten would have never come back, then maybe at that point, they'd have been, I mean, obviously one less conference they would have had to compete against. But, I think Coach Fickle's doing an excellent job. I had thought that he might get a chance at that Michigan State job, but the more and more you look at it, Mark, he's got a better roster at Cincinnati than he would have at Michigan State.
Well, as I understand it, he had his choice of that Michigan State job. He just didn't want it.
That's what I heard, but I mean, why would you leave a team that's probably more talented? I mean, if Cincinnati and Michigan State play at a neutral field right now, Cincinnati could probably beat them by a couple scores.
Yeah, and I wouldn't look at the job opening necessarily like that, but it's just, I don't know that I would want to go to Michigan State. I think it's becoming one of the tougher places to win because of what's expected versus what the competition in the division is.
Well, he's recruited pretty well out of the state of Ohio. I mean, he's kind of taken some of the Ohio guys that Ohio hasn't offered. Actually, Kentucky, the state of Ohio, too. I think both of them have kind of come into the Ohio area and kind of gotten some players. I've gone back and forth on that with a lot of people, Mark. I would say that, Ohio State, and I understand why Ohio State nationalizes their recruiting base. I totally get it. But, I looked it up. Do you know how many starters on the 2014 national title team they had from the state of Ohio?
How many starters?
Yeah.
Out of the 22, I'm going to go with, let me scan the field a little bit. I'm going to say 7.
15.
Oh, they had 15.
I'll name them for you. 15. Yeah. The entire offensive line was from the state of Ohio. Cardell Jones was from the state of Ohio. Jalen Marshall was from the state of Ohio. Devin Smith was from the state of Ohio. 3/4 of the defensive linemen, Michael Bennett, Dolphus Washington, Steve Miller, were from the state of Ohio. Darren Lee and Josh Perry, 2 of the linebackers, were from the state of Ohio. And Dorian Grant and Tyvis Powell, the one corner and the one safety, were from the state of Ohio.
Yeah,
not bad.
It's impressive.
Yeah, and I understand the theory of nationalizing, but I still think because Tressel went 60-40 Ohio, and Meyer went 40-60 the other way. But I've made the case that they've kind of passed on some guys that I think would have been good prospects. Not too many, but and I understand their reasoning for nationalizing. I still think you should. I myself might be a little bit closer to 50-50, but that's just my opinion.
Well, fortunately, they're in a state where it's still a top 6 to 7 state in the nation in terms of recruiting, because you have to balance that need to go national, to compete for national championships, versus trying to maintain those relationships with the coaches and maintain that balance of that you're valuing the talent within the state.
Sure. I mean, Alabama and South Carolina have great high school football, but Clemson's just not recruiting South Carolina, and Alabama's just not recruiting Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they nationalize, It makes sense. I mean, it totally makes sense. Last thing before I let you go, Mark, do you think we see any Pac-12 football?
No.
Well, you think it's a done deal, huh?
I just think that they have too much to overcome with these local governments and state governments. I think there's too much going on there that is very restrictive at this point. And if the Big Ten just snuck under the wire for October 24th, I think it would be foolish for the Pac-12. As I mentioned, you probably heard me a number of times talk about the Big Ten targeting late November. I think that's just foolish, and it makes your conference look like a joke when you're on the field at the same time as the rest of the nation playing college football, but you can't compete for the playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I think Larry Scott in them, I think they got involved in the politics out there. I really do. And I think I know that there's that term that's being used, it just matters more. I got to ask that question about the Pac-12.
Yeah, in reverse.
Do you think it really, in reverse. Does it really matter, out here as far as like it does, obviously in the South, we know how much it does, but, fortunately we saw how much it did matter in the Midwest. So, out there, I just don't think it, I mean, you see it, I don't see any kind of movement that you saw in the Midwest, out there in the Pac-12 as far as getting it back.
No, we would be hearing about it. And yeah, there are little pockets of resistance, but like these USC players that organized, but not to the extent of parents and coaches. We haven't heard anything out of the coaches. Immediately Scott Frost pounded the podium, and Ryan Day, and then later Jim Harbaugh and a few others just at least showed some fervency. They still supported the conference, but those three in particular, of course, and really those two in particular, Frost and Day, out in front of it. We haven't heard any of that from the Pac-12. None of that from the Pac-12. From the coaching ranks.
Yeah, it's kind of sad. Yeah, and it's sad too, because I heard Joel Klatt mention it. I think this is going to set their conference back. I really do. I mean, by the way, you guys do excellent work, you and Steve Dace, on that your podcast. By the way, really good stuff there.
Thank you.
Enjoy it. And I just thought that the comment that Steve had made about how much this could set the Big Ten back and set it back for a long period of time if we wouldn't have gotten this season. I mean, I think there was a lot of truth to that, and I think the Pac-12 is going to feel this. I really do. I mean, you feel the same way about that?
Well, I don't think there's any question. Although, I think that what we just talked about in regards to the lack of resistance coming from the Pac-12 is exactly what we just stated. It doesn't matter as much to as many people. Are there Pac-12 football fanatics? Yes, they exist. They do exist, but there's just not enough of them. And but I think that the political climate and the acceptance of what's going on the West Coast in regards to the pandemic gives them a little bit more of a cushion than the Big Ten. I still think it damages them considerably, but I don't think to the degree, because I think they're given a bit of a pass because of the conditions that are perceived or real in all those states.
Well, that's true. That's true. Good point. Well, I just want to close by saying I've been a big fan of you for 3 years. I've enjoyed your work. I'm happy to see that you're back. I hope everything is well. And it's just been a pleasure to speak with you. I enjoy your work on Steve Dace's podcast. I'm going to continue to try and hit you up on Twitter and message you. But I really do enjoy your work, Mark. It's been a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight.
Well, David, I appreciate your support. See your comments all the time that are always informative and encouraging. So thank you so much for that. And it's people like you that keep us going, keep me going, and to hopefully continue to deliver content for you. So thank you so much for calling in after 3 years. Appreciate that.